Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Development Management Committee. First thing I have to say is that those present at this meeting should be aware that by law it can be recorded by anyone attending. This means the meeting can be filmed, audio recorded, photographed or reported electronically by the use of social media. But this does not apply to any part of the meeting that is held in private session. Therefore, anyone present should be aware that they could be recorded at this meeting, and any member of the public who does not wish to be filmed should move to an area of the meeting room away from the camera. Anyone recording must cease as soon as the meeting is declared closed. Now, this meeting is being webcast by the Council. Is there anybody else who's going to record? No? Okay, thank you. So, item 1, substitutions. Thank you. And apologies just from Mandy Perkins. Thank you. Item 3, minutes to confirm as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of November. Do we agree those? Thank you. Item 4, notification of urgent business or items withdrawn. I have not been told of any. And item 5, declaration of interest by members. I will declare County Council and North Wales Parish Council. Nobody else? Okay, thank you. So item 6 then is 98 to 102 Great North Road, Hatfield, erection of 24 retirement living units, category 2 sheltered housing, with associated communal facilities, car parking and landscaping following the demolition of existing buildings.
This application is presented to the Development Management Committee because Hatfield Town Council have objected due to the lack of parking provision. The site is located at the junction of Great North Road and Hertford Road at the northern edge of Old Hatfield. The surrounding area is mixed in character, comprising residential and commercial properties. Bear with me, I'll just find the photos. So this shows the application site and the existing buildings. On the opposite side of the road is a commercial building, 3 stories with a pitched roof. As you can see, there's considerable variation in the scale of the surrounding buildings, which range from chalet bungalows situated on the Ride to the east of the site, 2.5-storey houses on Burley Mead to the north, as well as 2.5-storey flats on the opposite side, on the south side of the junction, adjacent to the Red Line Public House. To the west of Great North Road, either side of the railway bridge, there are larger 3- and 4-storey commercial and residential buildings. The photo on the screen shows a 3-storey residential building. That's the view from Great North Road, and the site is at the top right. You just see the roof of the existing dwellings. If I just go back to the site plan. The proposed site plan shows that the existing grass verge and mature trees to the north and south of the site would be maintained and the landscaping would be enhanced. The layout of the development also has regard to the lower density residential areas to the north and to the east of the site. Whilst the footprint of the proposed building would be nearer to Great North Road and the Hertford Road frontage, the retained setback would be comparable to the existing development on the other 3 corners of the junction. Accordingly, it is considered that the proposal would respect the existing pattern of development in the surrounding area. Upon some of the queues seen in Old Hatfield. In terms of height, the building diminishes when moving away from the corner of the junction from 4 stories to 3.5 stories and then to 3 stories. Furthermore, variations in facing materials and detailing and the roofscape have been employed to ensure that the massing of the building is broken down so that it reads as a collection of domestically scaled frontages. The scheme proposes a palette of high quality materials and traditional form of detailing which would create a well articulated and visually interesting building of an appropriately high standard for this location. Notwithstanding this, a condition is recommended that materials would be approved to ensure that detailed design is properly assessed and agreed. The proposal seeks to widen the existing access, which would lead to a parking court towards the northeast corner of the site. The development proposals have been considered by the Highway Authority and no objections have been raised. In terms of sustainable transport, the site is well located within walking distance of a range of shops and services and benefits from immediate access to footways, cycleway and public transport. It is observed that a bus stop is located on Hertford Road, immediately adjacent to the site. The site is also located within walking distance of a parade of shops, approximately 200 metres west, and Hatfield Railway Station, which is approximately 400 metres to the south. The town centre is approximately 800 metres away, which at an average pace is approximately 12 to 16 minutes walk. The site is therefore considered to be one of the most sustainable locations in the borough, given it's highly accessible to local amenities and modes of transport other than the private car. The proposed retirement flats are for sheltered housing with the part-time manager and some communal facilities, which include a lounge, a guest suite and electric buggy store. There is no evidence that additional care provision is involved. Instead, the proposal caters for the needs of the relatively independent older people within a C3 residential use. In terms of parking, 34 spaces would typically be required for a development of this type. In this case, 20 spaces are proposed, including 2 disabled bays. In this regard, the application is supported by a detailed transport assessment which sets out the applicant's case for the reduced amount of parking. The evidence draws on the company's experience in constructing numerous sheltered housing schemes across the country and profiling the typical resident. The independent research shows that the residents typically own 0.59 cars per apartment, equating to a total of 14 spaces for the proposed scheme. The provision of 20 parking spaces should therefore be adequate to accommodate parking demand within the site, given its sustainable location. The Council's parking services team were consulted and did not object, noting that all of the surrounding streets are subject to controlled parking between 10 and 11 AM Monday to Friday. This prevents long-term and commuter parking but allows for visitors. In conclusion, the proposal makes effective and efficient use of a vacant site. The location of development would be highly accessible and would provide additional accommodation in the area to support local shops and services. In addition, the provision of housing for older people is welcomed and consistent with the aims of the NPPF to deliver a mix of housing. The proposal would also have an economic benefit during the construction phase and a limited social benefit through the provision of windfall residential units, making a valuable contribution to local housing supply, which reduces pressure on housing land to take elsewhere. So, subject to the suggested planning conditions, it is considered that the design of the development would adequately respect and relate to the character of the area, and the amenity of adjoining occupiers would be maintained to an acceptable level. Consequently, it is considered that the proposal affords benefits in all areas of sustainability and is in accordance with the aims and objectives of the District Plan and the NPPF. It is therefore recommended that planning permission
speakers on this tonight, and as the speakers will know already, I expect, you get 3 minutes in which to speak, and after 2.5 minutes I shall shout out half a minute, and at the end of that half minute you will cease speaking. So the first
Good evening, members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'll focus on one key issue, the impact on highway and pedestrian safety. Before I go into detail, it's worth saying a bit about our use. Essentially, our development is the modern version of sheltered housing. The scheme will have communal facilities with a house manager. The market aim is for people who want to downside and to be located where they don't have to drive and are part of a health needs. It's aimed at the independent and active elderly. We know our market and the needs of who we will sell apartments to. From a survey of a variety of schemes in a variety of locations, it was found that the demand was 0.55 car parking spaces per apartment, and as your officer has indicated, that indicates 14 spaces are required for this development to meet the needs of our residents. Given the car ownership in this part of Hertfordshire, we're actually providing a lot more than what is actually required. Your officers agree that we're providing sufficient car parking spaces. It should be noted that the Highway Authority raised no objections to the impact on highway and pedestrian safety, subject to 3 conditions. These conditions have been included within the list of conditions for members. Before I finish, it's worth setting out the benefits of this scheme briefly. These include the release of under-occupied homes, allowing people to downsize, reducing the impact on the NHS through addressing the issues of loneliness and the social benefits of the development, and boosting business activity through increased spending from the residents. In conclusion, the scheme provides significant benefits and provides needed houses for older people without causing any harm to the local area. Thank you.
Speaker is Councillor James Broach on behalf of Hatfield Town Council.
Thank you, Chair. I would, before I start, say that Hatfield Town Council has no objection to the proposed use of this building overall. As you say, it's great to see this building finally potentially being put to good use. But we do believe that insufficient parking space has been made available for residents, not just residents, but staff and guests to this facility as well. I get that not many residents of this building may use cars, but as has been mentioned, these are independent elderly residents. They are perhaps more likely to have cars. And I think it's perhaps not necessarily reasonable to take numbers purely on face value. And also we must look at things like weekends. It's likely that during the weekends there are likely to be a higher number of visitors coming onto site to visit the residents. This is all sounding very deja vu for the application I spoke to you about last month, but there is one big difference in that, and that lies in paragraph 10.44 of the officer's report, which has been highlighted. That states that only 20 spaces are to be provided when typically 34 would be required. That's less than 60% of what our own council guidelines specify for parking provision in new developments. Surely this alone highlights some real issues with its applications, that it's so far below the minimum that we expect. And I'd ask, are you really willing to set a precedent to allow an application that has this much of a shortfall in parking provision? Because if you do, there's nothing to stop other developers coming down further down the line and saying, well, you let that lot off with 60% provision, why can't you let us have that as well? So I think that's something that's worth really close consideration. Some residents in the surrounding areas have expressed concerns about the proposed impact of this development, especially during the construction phase when contractors and where they're going to park. And I'd request that if you're minded to approve the application, that there's some sort of stipulation put on the plans that prevents construction contractors from parking in nearby residential areas over and above the 1 hour parking restriction that's already in force. Because there will be nothing stopping the contractors during that 1 hour parking restriction, taking their cars, moving them somewhere else and bringing them back again once that 1 hour window's out of the way. So that needs looking at as well. But in a nutshell, this application has frankly woefully inadequate parking provision, and as such I would ask you to refuse the ones before us tonight and work with the applicants to provide a better solution to this area, and then hopefully we won't be in a position where we have to object against this application. Thank you.
Councillors? Tara, yes, please. Yep.
Can I look at one of the pictures again, please? Can I go back to the site map? There was a couple of things I wanted to look at. Some black squares. What are they? I just want to understand. See those 2 black rectangles? What are they?
The dotted lines?
Yeah. They're more parking spaces, are they? Because that makes it 22. Oh, okay. To be demolished. So potentially.
So if you see there's a dashed black line underneath the footprint of the building, shows the footprint of the existing building to be demolished. And likewise these dashed lines in the bottom corner show the footprint of
Okay. Is there potential for more parking on site, basically? I think that's the question I'm basically trying to get to.
That area provides the outdoor amenity space, communal garden. So without, you would lose some of that space to provide parking.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Keeping on the topic of parking, as James has mentioned, I also noticed at 1044, and it suggests that 34 on-site spaces would be required, but then in 1045 it says, but actually based on the information provided, that actually there was a reduction. But what I have noticed, and from the glossy brochure that was sent through to us, we've seen that 75% of residents in the 60 to 64 age group own a car, but this is actually marketed at 60 and under. So I know McCartney and Stone next door, Peel Court, so that's marketed at the over 70s. And there are some parking issues there, but traditionally about 73% of those residents would only own a car. But actually I would argue that 55 and 60-year-olds, I mean, we've heard about elderly residents, I beg to differ. 55-year-olds, I think, are likely to have a car. So I think this car parking issue is something we have to take quite seriously, because, and I suppose I would throw it back to officers, is there more that can be done to discuss car parking spaces? Because I personally don't accept the numbers put forward as being a true figure based on the age demographics of the potential buyers. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob?
Part of Fiona also mentioned something I was going to ask. Have we got any comparisons with the Peel Court development regarding parking? There doesn't seem to be very much parking there at all, but is that a real problem? Because there again, close to a station, do you really need more parking? That's just my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I also am a little concerned that people, on the whole, are getting fitter and living longer. And so, although it might be okay at the moment for the number of parking spaces, in a few years there may not be enough, as people are fitter and perhaps more likely to drive at an older age. But my main issue that I'd like to raise is the comment made, it's listed on page 7, pointing out that the proposed building is south facing, and why couldn't we fit it with solar panels? It seems like a really good idea to me, and a lot of the comments in the report are made about sustainability, and obviously the transport issues and the location, but could we not add to that by considering having solar panels fitted, and could we not do this whenever possible to keep our carbon emissions down? Thank you.
Okay, I do have a question about highways, and one that's actually, I have got three things I wanted to ask. The first is regarding the parking, because one of the mitigations that's presented is that there is conditioned within the proposed permission is that occupation will only be by people 60 and over, or 55 as a spouse of somebody 60. But do we have control of that, and will actually the applicant have any control of that once these properties are sold? And in fact, how are we going to prevent somebody who perhaps inherits one of these sold properties from occupying it if they are below that age? I don't quite get how that would work, and obviously there's a roll-on from that to potentially impacts in terms of parking. The second question I had was in relation to the conditions that are imposed or suggested. And that is that prior to development beginning, there is a requirement for what I assume will be Section 278 works to adjacent pavements and the entranceway to the property to be lodged as plans, but not that any of that work is actually carried out before development occurs. Now, that particular area has got really quite tight turning already. It's acknowledged in this that getting in and out of the current entrance is challenging, and we're talking about construction traffic going into it, I think potentially causing havoc. I think the condition should say that the 278 changes to the footpath, widening of the entranceway, and the other changes to the footpath should be prior to the development, rather than on occupation of the development, as it currently says. The final question I had is actually of condition 10, which is the condition that looks at the BAT survey report. It says the development hereby permitted must not be carried out other than in accordance with the approved BAT survey report and the mitigation measures detailed within the report. Could officers assure me that within that report there is some allowance for if further roosts and particularly hibernation or maternity roosts are found, that there is suitable mitigation planned within that report? Because nowhere in the paper is that referred to.
In a moment, and then Alan, that's yours, isn't it?
Thank you, Chairman. I must go along with James on this about the parking, because the amount of park spaces are adequate for the residents, but come weekends or high days and holidays, perhaps they'll want their relatives to pop in. I know this particularly Hertford Road is a cul-de-sac since the bridge collapsed about 40 odd years ago, but I must say that as far as the construction traffic, we're all going to be faced with construction traffic wherever there's buildings anyway, but I think going with Paul, I think we've got to sort out anything that might hinder the other residents of that area. Thank you.
Thank you. The discussion on parking and that. The only example I know is Roseacre Gardens. That is a big elderly persons development with not a lot of parking spaces, and it seems to work. I have not seen in all the years that it's been up, I haven't seen any overspill or anything like that. It seemed in that block of flats for elderly people, it works. And as far as trying to control who can buy it, if you actually see an advert for the sale of a house, it actually specifies that only people of a specified age can actually buy it.
We're saying about the age group. Now, speaking as a 65-year-old, bless me.
21.
Yeah, next week. There is 2 cars that we use. And the other point, I was just thinking of what happens. Hopefully, the residents will last till they're in their 80s or whatever. But what happens if they suffer from dementia? Will the responsibility fall on the council to house them, releasing the properties for sale? Because we're trying to build stuff for residents anyway, but there's nothing in here to say what help McCarthy Stone would give those residents.
Not very different to anyone in their own house who suffers dementia. The thing about parking for elderly people is tricky. There are probably plenty of people, some people on this committee who are over 60 and and still drive cars, and my father drove till he was 92. It is just on the other hand, the developers here who run these homes say, not homes, houses, say that they have evidence that there isn't a great car use for the people who occupy them. But I'll ask the officers now just to deal with this parking, because we've got 20, whereas we might have had 34 by our normal standards.
Okay, thank you. First, if I clarify, the planning statement which accompanied the application explains that the properties would be leased with a condition or a covenant that the age restriction is 60 years, although if you were a couple there would be a lower age limit of 55 for one person. In terms of parking, the spaces the applicant is proposing to charge a fee for an annual fee for a space, and the availability of parking within the area. If you weren't to have a space on site, there's nowhere conveniently nearby where you would keep a car because of the parking control zone. So that would these units appeal to occupiers who wish to retain car ownership, and they would know from the outset if there was a parking space available to them. In terms of the construction management phase, there is a condition suggested for a construction management plan which includes provision on site for parking and also routing and deliveries. However, there's only so much that there's no limit, no control on parking outside of the site. Only that provision is made available within it, but we couldn't control where contractors park beyond that, the parking control zone area.
Okay, Paul's suggestion that the works to the entrance and the paths are carried out before the work starts.
Well, the construction management plan would require details of the access for the construction phase, but the permanent arrangement would only be agreed prior to occupation.
And we couldn't ask for that prior to commencement of the work?
Would that be reasonable? No.
What it goes to is the adverse impact, albeit temporary, on the amenity of neighbouring residents. So, I mean, I seriously think that unless the access way is widened and appropriately changed, that it would adversely affect the amenity of neighbouring properties in terms of access being to their properties being blocked by construction traffic trying to access and egress from the site, and finding that challenging because of the narrowness and so on of the access points. So could you explain why it's not acceptable to condition this so that those changes are done first, or at least mitigated, the issues are mitigated at least?
Construction development, so the construction management plan, that will include details of the types of vehicles, and traffic management requirements. The construction and storage compounds, including areas designated for parking. In terms of the access itself, it includes post-construction restoration and reinstatement of the works and any temporary access to the public highway. So we would have that information prior to the construction in relation to the access, and then prior to occupation the final details of surfacing and layout.
But that's not specifically dealing with the entrance, is it?
It's an issue with large construction vehicles and the challenges that they can sometimes find actually accessing a site. Now, I had this absolutely happened to me just yesterday. Driving down the road, tipper truck in front of me finds access into a construction site challenging and therefore stops, forcing me to cross a solid white line into oncoming traffic to actually navigate round them. Now, what I'm trying to do is avoid the situation where, through the conditions that we're applying, that happening to residents whilst construction is actually going on. And it seems to me that if our condition says that the access needs to be sorted prior to works being undertaken on site, that we have at least attempted to address that.
It is a quiet road there. There's a cul-de-sac on that part, and there's not, through traffic.
Well, there's through traffic to the 100 or so, was it 1,500 some houses on Bullstag Green? Go down that road? There are quite a number of residences down there.
But it's not like, the main road going across the junction there.
We could add to the construction traffic management plan details of the access arrangements to the site for the construction phase.
So you think that would assist in preventing us going of issue?
Well, I think it would, and bearing in mind that the Highway Authority didn't object to the issue.
They didn't object to the place where I got stuck and forced into the oncoming traffic.
Okay, Irene, is that yours?
Yes, it is actually. I must be the only person here that doesn't have a problem with the parking, because is it correct that it is warden assisted? Is it a warden assisted home? Did I hear, or have I got that wrong?
We've got a manager. There will be a warden there.
You have. Well, quite honestly, I think that anybody's going into a warden assisted is not going to have two cars, and they're not going to be rushing around the country when they've got local transport everywhere. They've got local shops, they've got local transport, and I really can't see that there will be a problem. I really just don't.
Okay, thank you. Right.
I've just got one quick question here. We've got 7 singles, 17 doubles, and we've also got a guest suite. What's a guest suite? So that's another. Is that another apartment? So is that included in the 7 and 17, or is that an additional? Right. Okay. That was it. So we've got more. Right. Okay. Fine. Plus staff. Fine. Okay. Thanks.
You asked a question just about the enforceability of the age restriction. There is a condition which restricts the age of the occupants, which is entirely enforceable. And another way that you could deal with it, as the officer mentioned, is you could have a Section 106 restriction that required in every lease that there is a restriction on the age of the occupants, and that is what McCarthy and Stone are suggesting. And that, again, is entirely enforceable. So there is a way of making sure that nobody under the age actually occupies.
You reassured me a little that it was lease rather than sold. So it wasn't clear that it was leasehold rather than freehold.
they're selling long lease.
I haven't had my question answered. Is it possible for someone to comment on my request for that solar panels to be considered as a possibility? Thank you.
We don't have a condition. Sorry, we don't have a policy requiring solar panels. They can be conditioned. However, bear in mind that they would be on the elevation fronting the highway and very prominent within the surrounding area.
Okay.
Sorry, can I just say that does that mean that people think solar panels are ugly? Because surely we should be glad to see solar panels wherever they are put, because renewable energy is the incoming thing, and we should be, you know, championing it, not saying, oh, we don't want it because it doesn't look very nice. Surely. Thank you.
I'm afraid the public does think solar panels are ugly. And presumably why we don't have them on our EMS scheme. Right, may I have a proposer for this then?
Can I just make a couple of tweaks? And to question, in relation to condition 2, do you want the site access arrangements to be added? Condition 3, I think you should have the requirement for the details that are agreed to then be implemented. And the drawing that Mark has on the screen at the moment is an amendment which shows the disabled parking bays, so that would need amending in the drawings as well. So clarification on relation to site access arrangements, but subject to the other two elements.
Given the number of concerns that are being raised about the parking, I think it's a real shame because McCarthy and Stone are known to provide, you know, quality dwellings. The Peel Court development is lovely. It's in my ward. I've been in there. I know several of the residents who live there, and these are luxury apartments with hefty monthly management fees, which people are prepared to pay. Many of them do have cars, and the fact that they're going to be 55 and 60 years old, they're going to be very active still, and that would probably include car ownership. I mean, I note from the report there's going to be mitigating measures against the noise, and that's to be welcomed. I think it will be a high quality design, and I would hate to think that the parking is a sticking point, but time and time again we discuss parking issues and not wanting to cause further problems for existing residents. So I don't know how we can get around this, but equally it is still, I think, a very significant issue that we need to take note of and can't just ignore, saying that this is elderly, for elderly residents who won't be driving. They're going to be 55 and 60. That's not elderly nowadays.
No, but the flats will be sold with or without a parking space, and the first few will go with parking spaces for those that want them, and then there'll be perhaps a dozen left that don't have parking spaces, and then there's the option whether you buy them or not. And if you know the area, you know there is no other parking there, you'll have to take that decision whether you buy one.
Maybe clarify that then, that the spaces would actually be sold with a unit, with an apartment, as opposed to there are a set number of spaces. So perhaps that could be a condition which would then mitigate.
Wanting to ask about the bats question, because I think you came back on that. It's condition 10, I think it was.
We consulted with Hertfordshire Ecology, who have advised that the mitigation measures within the submitted report are acceptable and that that shouldn't be regarded as a constraint on the development subject to their suggested condition. It's also relevant to note that a European Protected Species licence will be required to proceed lawfully.
So you're confident that the report contains suitable measures if further evidence of different bat roofs actually transpires once the further surveys are undertaken, because it does indicate that as part of this report continued surveillance for bats whilst post permission should be undertaken. So you're happy that that's actually going to in place and happen?
With the advice that we've received from our consulted experts.
Okay.
It's not about bats. In terms of the two issues with the car parking and the age restrictions, if you want a more robust approach, you could have a Section 106 agreement that deals with the covenant in the lease and also the requirement that the car parking spaces are sold as part of one of the units. So you could seek to secure that through an obligation. You could also do it through a condition. So there are options available to you to ensure that that actually happens, to address those two issues that you've raised.
Planning obligation will incur more cost both for the authority and for the developer. However, it is far stronger and has longer terms and enforceability. A condition you can only enforce for up to 10 years after it has been breached, whereas an obligation will remain forever, subject to them not coming back to seek any amendments. So if your concern is both short and long term, then I would recommend a Section 106. If you're satisfied that with a condition there, that they would be in the right frame of mind to continue doing the right thing, then a condition will be acceptable.
You allocate this, right? Then I think we'll do it with as a condition and not cause unnecessary cost. If you agree with that, Lisa. Yes. Okay, may I have a proposal? Thank you. Two speakers on this. The first one is Dr. Mohammed, please.
Assurance to the committee here that the property is a very large property as it stands, and when it's rented out to any family, it always leaves rooms vacant and creates temptation to use the vacant rooms for sublets, etc., etc. It doesn't mean to say the property is being used as a hotel, as it has been alleged. So I want to give the reassurance to the committee that the sole purpose of this application is to utilize the property in a rightful manner, in a legal manner, for two small families, albeit 2 members or 3 members, 1 member, whatever it is. It will be 2-bedroom, 2 units of 2 bedrooms. And I think it gives a balance to the use of the property and the local in the locality. There is a 1-bedroom next door to it, and there are other plans which has been approved. So I want to give reassurance to the committee that there is no sinister motive other than simply just to do the right thing. And we find that it is what is in demand in the local authority. And I totally fully support the case officer's recommendations. I couldn't find any reasons, following the national policy guidelines, it complies with absolutely everything. So whilst there are concerns raised by the neighbours, it's not been substantiated. It is hearsay, but I respect their opinions, and I recommend that the case officer's recommendations are carried. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions if there are any questions. Okay.
Thank you. And James again, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've lost count of the amount of times I've spoken about this property at DMC. I'm sure you lot have too. This is a property that has caused untold misery to local residents over the years, and not just being used as unlicensed HMO. So if you'll indulge me, we'll have a brief history lesson. It's not hearsay that it was allegedly being used as a hotel. There's Booking.com that I brought up today. Address, 11 Holly Close, Hatfield, AL10 9JB. That's pretty open and shut to me. It's on Booking.com right here. Reviews are fantastic. They're so dire that even Basil Fawlty would have passed comments. And with rooms still available last week when I looked, I could have booked to stay there last weekend if I felt so inclined. However, recent changes, recent news is neighbours to this property received letters through the door stating that the property will be changed to provide services to adults with learning disabilities, which, according to them, doesn't require any change of use from C3. They've already started building works to that effect and allegedly called the police in response to complaints from neighbours when they complained about drilling that's taking place late at night. But all this in mind, it won't surprise you have dire concerns about this application. The applicant in the past was told no when they applied to an HMO licence. The applicant now wants to have two times 2-bed flats, which could still hold up to 8 people, which I believe is his way of trying to get an HMO by default. It's the way of trying to get the same number of people, or thereabouts, that he was told no to back in 2013. And this council needs to stand his ground and tell him no again. And it's not just a thing we're seeing in this property. It's things that are happening quite often now, with people applying to convert houses into flats to circumvent any potential HMO rules. And you look at the surrounding area of this, it's family homes, it's terraced family houses. And to convert one into flats would set a frightening precedent in this area, because if it went through, you'd have every other private landlord in this area be queuing up to do exactly the same thing to avoid any potential future tightening up of mandatory HMO licensing. At the moment, the HMO licensing rule says it's 3 stories that you have to have a licence. If maybe in the future that was changed to include 2-storey houses as well, that would take near enough all of Hatfield into consideration as well. And once you turn a house into a flat, it's very hard to turn it back into a family house again. And I ask you, do you want to go down in history as the councillors who condemn rows and rows of family houses to be converted into flats, ipso facto HMOs by default, just a clever way of getting around it? So if, despite all the points I've raised tonight, you're still minded to approve, I would ask you to defer your decision so that we can figure out what exactly is going on with this property. Is it a C3 use house, as we've been told, a hotel, as this website shows, a care centre, as letters through the doors of local residents have been told, or a property earmarked for a conversion, as we've been told tonight? There's simply too many unanswered questions in this case, and I'd urge you to give serious consideration and ideally refuse it. Thank you.
Now, councillors, I'll just remind you that the only reason you refused it when it was here in September was because of the porch, which is no longer on the plan. That was the reason for refusal. Anyway, comments, questions? Nick?
I'm still flashing from before.
Oh, are you? Right.
Thank you, Chairman. I've still got to go with James on this one even stronger, because we've got a report from Kieran Thorpe, besides James, the neighbours. James has brought up that this particular property has had so many titles put over it. All right, we've refused it before because of the porch issue. But we've still got this point that it is a narrow road. An ambulance couldn't get down there to pick a patient up. There's another point about refuse and recycling bins. If you can't get an ambulance up there, you can't get a dustbin man bin lorry down there. So it is not being very nice to the people down that road. Now, I think so I'll be voting against officer's recommendation on this, solely on the point that we don't know what this is going to end up. I know we can't make a decision on the future, only what's before us, but I don't know what's before us. Is it a two-bedroom flats? Is it a house? Is it a hotel? Is it going to be a care home? So until I can see what it's going to be at the end of it, I've got to go against officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Just say, before us today is the conversion of a 6-bedroom dwelling into two-bedroom flats. So we know what it is intended to be. It says in the documentation it is going to be two-bedroom flats. What has gone on in the past is not really relevant. Also, the existing is a 6-bedroom dwelling. It will be converted to two bedrooms, so they will become 4-bedroom dwellings. Now, if you've already got a 6-bedroom dwelling, you can't see things getting much worse because you've got two-bedroom dwellings. But I'll leave that up to you. Paul, you're next. You are.
I know I was on, but I wasn't flashing. Obviously, Mark had beat me to it. The statement in 10.6 at the end says it would not normally be appropriate for the Development Management Committee to introduce reasons for refusal of an otherwise identical scheme unless there had been a material change in circumstances. Now, when we were looking at this the last time round, there was an extension to the porch envisaged as part of this property, and the rationale for that extension to the porch was to provide more appropriate and ease of access for 2 flats. Without the porch there is a question mark in my mind as to the amenity of the residents of those 2 flats, given that there is now a much more restricted access to both of those flats. Nowhere within the application have I been able to find dimensions for the front doors, for example, to those 2 flats. Now, I do believe that there is a requirement, a minimum requirement, for an individual front door access size, and I've been unable to ascertain whether the 2 doors in this particular property actually meet that. I've also been able to ascertain what the arrangements are for the proposed communal areas. And when you look at the communal areas, they are of significance in terms of party wall legislation to both properties. Now, unless there is clear evidence that the communal areas have been appropriately apportioned and some kind of management structure has been put in place to be able to effectively manage those areas, I don't think it appropriate to grant permission for this property, because we would be failing to guarantee the amenity of future occupants of the properties. So I will be going against officer's recommendation and proposing refusal of this application.
As Paul said, so you go into the front and you've got one goes up the staircase and one turns into the ground floor flat.
There is no planning policy requiring door widths to be of a certain size. However, the development would be subject to building control approval and would need to meet building regulations for a new dwelling. So in that regard, the applicant, if it was approved, would have to provide a suitably sized door.
Okay, and the amenity space?
The amenity space to the rear of the property is for the sole benefit of the ground floor flat, and as such, it will in common arrangement would be responsible for maintaining that area. The parking and hard standing to the front of the site is shared between the three units, which would be resulting from the development, and likewise they would presumably have joint responsibility.
So the first floor flat does not have any external amenity space?
That's correct.
Paul, yeah.
About the amenity space. I was talking about amenity in terms of the occupants residing in that location and actually having reasonable regard for their future living space. Now, if you're in this position where you have purchased one of these two flats, you have shared access areas. You have a porch, you have a hallway, and you have a set of stairs that are shared facilities. There is nowhere within this structure that outlines how those shared structures are apportioned, divided, maintained, or anything. Now, when you have a block of flats and you have a lift in the block of flats, there is an owner agreements that you sign up to, and there is no evidence in here that there's been any consideration or thought given to the shared stairway, the shared porch, the shared doorways, and so on. And actually that, for me, goes to the amenity of the future occupants, whether they have organised rights, whether they have shared responsibility for payments if the stairs need replacing, painting the hallways. If something happens to the porch, who pays? There's no obvious answer to that in this.
When a development of this type is sold, the deeds that you enter into stipulate who is responsible for maintenance of shared areas. Now, that could be split between the two owners of the properties, or it could be by a management company, but that is for the interested parties involved in that transfer to decide upon. It's not a planning matter, in my opinion.
What I wanted to say, it's nice, the idea of getting this property under control is obviously really appealing, but I have to say, I do think in terms of the resident impact, these are family homes. The reality is it's a 6-bedroom house. Normally you'd have, you know, parents, kids, etc. They wouldn't necessarily be driving, so all the parking issues that, you know, the town council brought up and that Kieran mentioned in terms of emergency vehicles, you know, all comes into play. I just don't see, it needs to be kept as it is. I know there's this concept of street scene in terms of how things look, but it also needs to be in terms of how things feel. And to me, it just shouldn't go ahead. It's a family home. It needs to remain as such, in my opinion. That's it.
Okay, I have to say to the committee that conversion of houses into flats comes up endlessly, including a decent number that we have refused and have lost on appeal. But there we are. Fiona?
Just picking up on something Tara said, at 1019 it makes reference to potential for the proposal to result in additional noise disturbance to the occupiers of the adjoining property. And obviously the report says, okay, it may intensify to some degree, but actually it won't be that dramatic. Yet we've heard, well, from James, that the property is being advertised on booking.com. I've also seen it on Airbnb, and I've seen 2 reviews on TripAdvisor. So we know that there's some degree of commercial activity going on there. And my argument would be, would this not relate to, so visitors come at different times of night. So they might arrive at midnight, they might arrive early in the morning, unlike a family who, I think as you've said, tend to occupy slightly more normal hours, not always. And so therefore, I feel that I'm looking for a planning reason because I'm concerned by this proposal. And I suppose in terms of impact on the neighbours, I think it will be significant. The fact that there is an outstanding enforcement case, can we have some clarification as to how that impacts? I mean, should we be seeking a deferral until we have an understanding of what officers have identified is happening at this site? Because, you know, we had the big long discussion about this at the last time this came to committee. People had raised concerns about potentially commercial activity happening here, and I think we're all a bit concerned about that. Not just me.
I just got a concern. Basically, you just say that currently we are considering the 6-bedroom dwelling, and that is for conversion to 2 by 2 bedroom flats. Now, looking at the application history, I think obviously it has been advertised onto booking.com, Airbnb. There are plenty of applications in the past been refused in HMO. Do we have any specific condition where we can make sure that the applicant is just going to use it as a flat? How can we enforce that condition to say, hey, he's not going to use this as an maybe hotel or as an HMO? How can we make sure? Thank you.
The applications for a change of use from 1 dwelling to 2, and it's a C3 dwelling at the moment, which should be used by families, and it should go into 2 dwellings that should be used by families. And there's policy support for that, which your officers have set out. The issue that you have is that there seems to have been an alternative use that has been taking place. Now that's an enforcement issue. That's an enforcement issue at the moment, which you're looking into, and if it's 2 dwellings and it's being used for commercial purposes, then that's an enforcement issue, but that's different to an application to change the use into 2 dwellings. I think you've got, unfortunately, a lot of history which indicates that it hasn't been used as a dwelling. I mean, I can't comment, but that's what seems to be the case. But what you're being asked to determine is whether this should be converted from 1 C3 to 2 C3 dwellings. If then it gets used commercially, then you have an enforcement matter that you have to pursue. But that would be the same whether it's 1 and it's being used commercially or 2. And just, if I can make one comment, in terms of the suggestion that it was a it may be used as an adult care facility, that can actually take place within a C3 dwelling lawfully. So that would be something that could be lawful in a C3 dwelling. That wouldn't be something you could necessarily enforce against. But you just need to perhaps just think about what you're being asked to determine and separate that from the enforcement issues that you've got, because if it is being used unlawfully, then you should pursue an enforcement against that unlawful use.
Approve this tonight, then we have to rely on the neighborhood to say, if someone makes a complaint to say, oh, this property is used as a hotel or HMO, then enforcement issue will come into the picture. Or
to it not being used as an HMO. However, I think around 2012, I don't have the exact details, we issued an enforcement notice that was appealed to prevent the building from being used as a large HMO for 8 people or more. At that time, we didn't have the information, because normally in a notice you'd say, stop doing this, take it back to that, and you'd take it back to the last lawful use. Unfortunately, we couldn't take it back to the last lawful use because the last use had been as an HMO for 6 people, which was contrary to the Article 4. So my belief is that the applicant has possibly been left a little bit in limbo. They obviously got their planning permission in 2015 for use as a C3 dwelling house, to which they're now trying to convert. Whether they have implemented that or not implemented that, we are obviously looking at as part of the enforcement team. But this application would take it from whatever it is being used now, if they were to implement it, to the flats, and then we could monitor it to make sure it's being used lawfully.
Sorry, no, Irene's flashing. Sorry, Irene, go on.
Can you just tell me, do we know if this property is covered with fire regulations or not?
It would be it would have to comply with building regulations in the conversion.
Fire regulations?
Which deals with fire regulations.
Does it? So it's got a stairs. Does it not need a fire door at the top of that stairs? If you're putting a staircase in, you need a fire door at the top of the stairs.
That doesn't fall under planning, as Mark said earlier in relation to another matter that was raised. That would fall under building regs, and they'd ensure that that took place as part of their regs.
Fiona made 99% of the points I was going to make. When I look at this in the black and white, cold light of day, I cannot see a planning reason why we can refuse it based on what we see in front of us. However, like Fiona did, like James has shown to us, we're aware of that commercial usage in terms of it being advertised in TripAdvisor. So, if it's a case of it's accepted, this is, I suppose, a bit theoretical, but could that tomorrow somebody say that once it's been given planning permission, that we can look at enforcement, because it's blatantly being used like that, yet looking at it as we're told as a planning application, I can't see a single reason why we can turn this down, because the porch was the issue, it's been resolved.
The planning application seems to me that it would regularise the situation rather than make it worse. Alan?
As far as the porch, we've still got a porch on the side of that building. But the other thing is, if we've got to wait for residents to say what is happening, by the time we get an order to say stop, I think we've got a responsibility to the residents in the area of what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. So I still can't see that this is going to, we've been on, the last case was about construction. Well, getting construction lorries down there will be a nightmare. But anyway, I digress. I'll just go back to what I said in the first place. I can't agree with the officer's opinion of it. So I've got to go against them. Thanks.
In making your decision tonight, you need to look at what it what the application intends to do, and try not to look back on what's happened before on the enforcement action that's going on, what it is intended to do. And that's what you're voting on tonight. Okay. So may I have a proposer then, please?
I would propose that we reject officers' recommendations. We refuse planning permission on the grounds that the adverse impact on future users' amenity and neighbours' amenity is unacceptable.
In what way do you consider that it's would have an adverse impact? Obviously, it's a 6-bed dwelling at the moment. What would be the change, do you consider, between a house for 6 people to flats?
As I said earlier, I think the change in access arrangements to 2 separate properties has not been adequately resolved, and I think that leaves future users of the properties in a potentially challenging, difficult situation. And I think there is, as Fiona quite rightly said, a difference between 2 properties that may have different uses, different patterns of use to a single property in terms of the impact on the neighbours.
Point doesn't fall within planning law. Any access arrangements would, as Mark said, be part of the deeds. But could I also draw your attention?
Because we have a policy where the consideration of future users' amenity of a dwelling or a permitted building is part of the consideration under planning. Now, surely if we consider that the future users of a property will be adversely impacted by the development approach, surely that's a relevant planning point.
Yes, it is, if I know what aspect of amenities it is you're got concerns with. When we look at amenity, we look at noise, maybe from an adjoining industrial unit, overlooking, loss of light and such like, none of which I consider applied to this case. If I can also draw your attention to page 71 with the appeal decisions, where the committee considered an application at 13 Deerswood Avenue, comparable, where that was conversion of a dwelling house into 2 flats, where the inspector allowed it with conditions. So I think you've got comparable situation there as well.
Just on this point, and it's a slight aside, but nevertheless, my first property was a ground floor, what was then called a maisonette, and somebody else lived on the first floor. So it's a little building, ground floor and first floor flat, in effect. And when I bought it, it was on a long lease, 900-year-old lease, but the lease dealt with who would deal with the roof, who would deal with the foundations, who would deal with the windows and the internal parts and everything. So it was all the way in which the building was to be maintained was dealt with in the lease that I had and the person upstairs had. And that, in my experience, is the normal way you do it in a sort of one down, one up type of building. Fiona, yes.
Just, I suppose, a counterpoint to that. That potentially would apply if the flats were being rented to permanent dwellers. If they were going to be advertised on Airbnb or Booking.com as 1 night, 2 night, 3 night, that could be a very different situation. No, I know.
Two self-contained 2-bedroom flats.
If Paul wanted to, could he include something about outstanding enforcement action in his response?
Regulations would adequately cover the impact of noise on the occupants. Ask the question.
I'm no expert on building regulations approval, but my understanding is from experience that when you convert an existing property into flats, you have to meet standards as if it was a new dwelling, and that involves sound testing between the floors and to the neighbours.
Does, yeah. Alan?
I can't see there's a comparison between Holly Close and Deerswood, because Deerswood is a road with access. This is a cul-de-sac. It's near the end, near the turning circle. So it's no comparison with Deerswood Avenue.
Waiting for somebody to propose to me then, as it were. Nick?
I'm probably going to go against the grain here, but I'm actually looking to propose that we accept officers' recommendations.
Thing everyone said. I'm hugely concerned about the parking issue down there, because anyone that's been there, you cannot move. But I'm not sure whether that wider issue is significant enough on this specific planning application, which appears on paper, which I think is the way we have to look at it, much as it sticks in my throat. It actually reduces the number of bedrooms, and thereby it should reduce, on paper, the parking issue. But I think there's a much wider issue that needs to be addressed somewhere, and that's that whole parking situation all around there. Because there's cars parked on grass verges, there's cars parked in people's driveways, there's rubbish left on the side of the road, because obviously I'm presuming nobody could get up there and collect it. But on a black and white planning application, I don't see any other option but to second that.
And future residents' amenity is too significant. And in terms of expanding and developing that argument, I'd invite officers to perhaps consider how that might be phrased appropriately. I don't think that.
10.32. Introduction of wheelie bins and recycling boxes has led to problems. Create a considerable amount of clutter, which in turn has a harmful impact on the visual amenity of the street scene and the character of the area, contrary to local policies D1 and D2. I don't know how much impact that will have.
I'm thinking in terms of density and parking. I disagree that a one-family household wouldn't have potentially four cars, which is what the two
But it's not used
flats.
as a one-family household.
No, but it's a six-bedroom house at the moment, so, and it needs to be enforced to be kept as that. So, parking and density.
asking under paragraphs 10.26 and 10.27, even as a 6-bed property, 3 parking spaces are required. This requires 4.25 spaces, so we've rounded it up to 5, and 5 are being provided, so they are providing all the parking provision required. Density. Obviously, you're not creating new physical units, you're subdividing, so in terms of the built form, that won't change. Would the change in occupiers result in numbers that would be significantly more to harm the character of the area? And I think yours, Councillor Chesterman, was in relation to bins. Obviously, the existing dwelling needs bins. The proposed does, so I...
bedroom house, that's say 3 bins. If it's 2 bedroom self-contained flats, that'd be double the amount.
Well, it wouldn't be 6 bins because the people upstairs wouldn't have a brown bin without 5.
Now we can use our brown bins for the food.
Which one do you think would be hit on costs least?
In the intensification to the use of existing cul-de-sac, because obviously currently there is just the 1 dwelling and now it will be 2 flats, so there will be obviously more cars and there will be excessive usage of the existing cul-de-sac, which is already quite narrowed.
But we can't show any intensification though, because it's a 6-bedroom house at the moment.
About the parking, because we already know that that area is, you know, packed for... So how can we say 5?
Parking requirements. We can't make up our parking standards ad hoc at every committee meeting. This one meets the standards. You may not like it for all sorts of reasons, but it meets the parking standards, and we've got to accept that. How are we getting on?
I'm getting there.
Right, Lisa will read out the reasons.
This will need refining. That comes from me as well as when we get it from councillors. The character of the area by subdivision of the existing unit would result in harm to the amenity of the existing occupiers, contrary to policy D2. I think of all the reasons that you've put forward, it will be difficult to defend. But I've just spoken to our legal advisor and we consider that that is the one that would protect the council the most.
Is that then, Paul?
I would be very happy to propose that.
Okay, may I have a seconder for that then? Pankit. (106A) College Lane, Hatfield, erection of single-storey rear, side and front extensions, hip to gable roof enlargement and the installation of front roof lights and dormer window to facilitate loft conversion.
Thank you, Chairman. This application is presented to Development Management Committee because Hatfield Town Council has objected to the proposal on the grounds that the development would be out of keeping with the neighbouring properties in the street scene. The extensions would represent overdevelopment of the site. The mass and bulk of the extensions would be inappropriate. And finally, concerns that the property may be used as student accommodation and/or HMO accommodation, considering its close proximity to the university. The application site is located on College Lane and comprises an end of terrace dwelling. College Lane forms part of an established residential area to the immediate north of the College Lane University of Hertfordshire campus. This end of terrace dwelling was granted planning permission in 2008 and has altered the appearance of the terrace row, namely through its double-hipped roof form. Whilst the proposed roof enlargements and alterations would change the dwelling to a degree, the lower hip of the dwelling would be retained and the rear dormer is subservient to the roof. Furthermore, materials would match existing. The ground floor additions are modest in scale and acceptably respect the design and character of the host dwelling. As such, it is considered that the resultant dwelling would acceptably retain its existing form and character. Residential properties along College Lane are varied in terms of their design and appearance. In visual terms, only narrow views of the extensions would be afforded from the street scene, having regard to the setback distance of the property from College Lane and presence of well-established soft landscaping to the front and side boundary of the site. Site visit photos are obviously taken during the site visit recently. However, in spring and summer months, that boundary treatment would not be in D-leave. Therefore, it is considered that development would still maintain the character of the existing area. In terms of the concerns regarding overdevelopment of the site, although the space to the side and rear of the host dwelling is restricted, the modest scale and single-storey form of the ground floor additions ensures that the resultant dwelling will not appear overdeveloped across its plot width. The unusually large front garden area also means that the resultant dwelling would not appear cramped relative to the plot, and more than sufficient outdoor amenity space would be retained. In terms of the concern regarding the property possibly being used as student accommodation and/or HMO, in this instance the proposal does not include the change of use of the property from C3 use to HMO. However, should a HMO be proposed in the future, this would require planning permission in its own right. Other material planning considerations, including the impact of the development upon the living conditions of neighbouring occupiers and parking provisions, are deemed acceptable. It should also be acknowledged that no other representations have been received against the proposal. Therefore, planning permission should be granted subject to the requested conditions.
Thank you. And we have two speakers on this one as well. And the first one is David Patrick, the applicant. Don't want to say anything. Okay. Then James Broach again for Hatfield Town Council.
I might as well just sit here all night, yeah? Only one page this time, though, you'll be pleased to hear. It's much shorter. We had several concerns about this application, some of which were highlighted and actually some of which have been addressed, having spoken to the applicants, where it's been clarified this is a family seeking to make their home bigger due to children getting older. The pictures, I think, clearly showed that as well, with all the play equipment in the garden. So those were the concerns that have been raised by the council. In terms of all the bits added together, we were also concerned that the property may appear to be out of keeping with the surrounding area, particularly compared to neighbouring properties. I don't think many of the other properties in that area have had those kind of works done. We ask you to bear those things sort of in mind when you're considering this and the comments that have been raised about from the Town Council on this application tonight as well. But what I would say is it would be really helpful if some of the information that's in the report tonight could be provided when we consider the application on the Town Council level. Because if it was as blindly obvious as this one tonight is, that this is a family trying to increase their home rather than move and save themselves some cost that way, this could have been dealt with a long time ago and we wouldn't be sat here tonight.
Okay, thank you. Councillors? Right, somebody want to propose? Nick?
I'm happy to propose officer's recommendation to accept this proposal.
Right, the next one, item number 9, is the Bellbrook, Bulls Lane, Hatfield, erection of 2 box stable buildings and manege, I think that should be, for private equestrian use with hard standings, a stable yard, parking and turning with access track to stables.
Because North Mims Parish Council have objected. Their reasons are given on page 52. They indicate that the access isn't required because there is an alternative access, and that the development would affect the openness due to its proximity to the road frontage. This property does have quite a long history, and I will run into some of it just to benefit you in relation to this proposal. You will see on the screen in front of you in a second the red outline, which is the area which is part of this application. This area is currently agricultural land, and the area within blue to the northwest, if presuming it's the north facing, is where the residential property is and the residential curtilage. An access was provided in a couple of years ago, which the Council had originally refused planning permission. The applicant then implemented hard standing. We took enforcement action. The inspector in both cases considered that the development was inappropriate and upheld the appeals, and they were dismissed. So there is the extant notice for the driveway to be removed. To the right hand side, and I'm going to turn around so you'll need to look at this screen if you can. This building here, you have an access. Can you hear whilst I'm turning away? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Access is provided from here to the Bellbrook, but they're proposing an access through here, as you'll be able to see on the next plan. The existing access is 5 metres wide, and they are proposing to reduce its width to make it 3.7 metres. It is also currently of crushed gravel, and they are proposing to change this into grasscrete. In one of the inspector's decisions notice, in relation to the enforcement, he did indicate that a narrow access might be appropriate. However, you obviously need to consider the openness, character of the area as to whether this one is acceptable or not. In addition, you have the stable block, which will provide 2 stables, a tack room and a hay store. Officers have considered this and considered it complies with Greenbelt policy, because you can have appropriate facilities for outdoor sport. Whilst this application is quite finely balanced, on balance it is considered that the proposal is acceptable, and it is therefore recommended for approval.
Two speakers on this. The first one is Mr. Cookson, who is the agent for the applicant.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try and be as brief as possible given the complexity of the case. Can I just make one very minor point about the description of the development? As the Chairman mentioned, the manege, that is no longer part of the application. So whether that makes any difference to members' views, I have no idea, but I mentioned that as a matter of fact. I would say that we've had extensive negotiations with your officers and discussions over a long period of time about this application. So we're gratified that we've come to the situation where it's been recommended for approval. And as been said, there's a long history of refusals, appeals and a current enforcement notice on the site. But we would stress that members are, as in one or two of the previous applications, considering the application on its current merits, not considering the previous history, and whether it now complies with policy. In our view, it's not sufficient to simply say it's in the green belt, so must be refused, which appears to be the Parish Council's position. We would remind members that the vehicle access to Bulls Lane that we're proposing to continue using exists and is legal. When I say the access, I mean the physical access out onto the road, not the road and not the access road in question, and can be used by the applicant at any time to access that field. The main issues therefore are the use of the land for horses, the erection of stables and the retention of the unauthorised access road. The keeping of horses for recreation and stables are both accepted uses in the green belt, and the new access road supports and serves both these developments, as existing access is inadequate for the size and types of vehicles involved. We feel that the officer's report sets out the policy and environmental issues very well, and we support its conclusions. The applicant does appreciate the need for the Council to secure various elements of the development by means of a unilateral undertaking in order to underpin the approval and as set out in the report. In conclusion, given the green belt, compatible uses, small scale, location and sympathetic design, particularly of the stables, the development is clearly compatible with national and local green belt policy in terms of key issues of land use, design and access. We submit to you therefore that there are no material reasons for refusing the development and therefore it can be properly and reasonably approved. Thank you.
And now, Councillor Linda Saffer from North Mims Parish Council, please.
Good evening. North Mims Parish Council have good reason to object to this proposal. It is a development which is in the wrong location, not least because it's in the green belt, but it is also not a sustainable site. There are existing stables here that have been lost in result of conversion to residential dwellings for private rent. Looking at Google Earth, you will see the large part of the proposed driveway currently exists, which is what you've been talking about. It's not actually shouldn't be there. Indeed, when you look at the photos, you can see that there is hard standing there. Google Earth also shows the proposed location would lend itself to becoming a completely separate dwelling very conveniently. Given there are no very special circumstances, there are other stables and riding facilities in the vicinity which would provide adequately for the area. No compensatory demolition is proposed, and this would lead to further built form in the green belt that would seriously impact the openness of the area. This is particularly relevant given the proposal's proximity to Bulls Lane, where it is easily visible as it fronts this road. The whole site is large enough to accommodate the stable block further back where the existing access driveway, which was adequate for the previous stables and existing hard standing, and this could be utilised rather than having a new road. North Mims Parish Council are concerned that given the neighbouring properties conversion, this would not be a stable block for long. North Mims Parish Council would therefore recommend refusal of this unsustainable proposal in order to prevent encroachments into the countryside and harm where it is avoidable and preserve the setting as stated in NPPF 80 and 88. Thank you very much for listening.
Councillors? Fiona.
start with, under the proposal 2.2, it mentions that the building would be L-shaped, approximately 12 metres wide, but it doesn't say how long it would be. Have I missed that? Or is it, could we put up a diagram, please? Is it 12 metres each way?
I was going to say, I don't know if the agent had the exact dimensions because it's not in the report, but I would say the depth is a little bit shy of what it is wide, so I would estimate, looking at that, probably 10 metres. Okay.
Thank you.
If I can be guided on this, could a condition be made on the fact that, as you say, we've got to look at what's in front of this. But again, on evidence from different people, this could be converted to a dwelling. Could a condition be made that it won't be converted to a habitable house?
Well, it would have to come back for planning.
Yeah.
A planning application again in order to do that.
But to save council's time and residents' time and any dreams or thoughts of what it could be, could we make a condition now?
You can't stop someone making an application for something in the future, and you can't really put a condition on. You could say it can only be used as stables, but that's what they're applying for. So they can't use it as a dwelling house. If they did, it would be unlawful, and there'd be a breach of development control. But you can't really put a condition on dealing with that.
On it that says it can only be used by the present owners of the house.
Yes.
You could, so they couldn't then sell it off. That would help, would it not? Yeah. Nick?
Just a couple of points really relating to the previous appeal and the driveway I've got an issue with. The proposed driveway is going to be 3.7 metres compared to 5. Whilst it's reduced in scale, it would still have a harmful impact on the character of the area, in my opinion, both in terms of greenbelt and landscape character. Also read in the planning statement the driveway would be for the use of the stable and access to the dwelling would not result in any issues. However, the drawings show the driveway would meet an existing concrete area. Could we just pull that bit up? So I'm conflicted by what that looks like. Because if
showed the area.
So, this is the road.
Yeah.
So you've got the access coming up here. This is the concrete pad, and then here is the land that's outside of the application site, which is gravel surfaced. So theoretically, yes, you could gain access across there to the residential curtilage.
that's what I've got a problem with this application.
It seems to me that it's currently 5 metres. Is that right? Which is a huge width. And it's going to be reduced to 3.7 metres, which in proper width is 12 feet. Now, there are no lorries that are 12 feet wide, because you can't drive a lorry 12 feet wide on the roads. And so we're being asked to approve something which is of huge dimensions in the green belt, which seems ridiculous. Thank you. Yeah.
Nick, because I'm slightly confused on this access side. I mean, still it's quite hard to understand if there is an existing access of 5 meter, why they are reducing to 3.7, and also I just heard from one of the objectors to say there is a single track or something, and now they're changing. So, can officers please go back to the access arrangement if they can explain it again? I would appreciate that. Thank you.
This road in front of it. Currently, that is 5 metres wide. It is unlawful, and there's an extant planning permission for it to be removed. As part of the enforcement notice. As part of this application, they're proposing to make it right and reduce it to 3.7 metres in width, which they consider, and officers have considered as part of the report, would reduce the harm on the openness, encroachments that the inspector considered previously. However, it's obviously up to members to confirm whether you think that that is acceptable, bearing in mind what Councillor Bolton has just said as well in relation to the width.
Thank you. Looking through here, I failed to see any special circumstances, which I know is something we're always minded to regard when we're looking at development on the Greenbelt, and I failed to see any.
Yes, Paul.
Can I just have some clarification on that? Because the stable block itself is not inappropriate development and therefore doesn't require special circumstances. It's appropriate development, so you can build it. But the track itself might be construed as being inappropriate development, mightn't it? So, officer confirm the current track that enforcement is against is designed specifically to be access to the residential property. This is proposed in here as being a combined access to the stables and the property. Is that correct? Am I correct in that?
Correct you on both points.
Okay, bye.
Yeah. The National Planning Policy Framework gives definitions of certain developments that are appropriate. Buildings for outdoor recreation are appropriate, subject to meeting certain tests, one of which is openness, and the other is the 5 purposes of including land within the Greenbelt. And I think at there is a paragraph in here where the officer considers the encroachments, which is one of the purposes, into the Greenbelt, and they consider that it is acceptable. So committee has obviously got to make that decision. In relation to, I've forgotten what your question was on the access. Sorry.
The original, well, I'm assuming that the access track.
Yes, sorry, I do remember.
Would be considered inappropriate development within the Greenbelt.
Yeah, I can remember now. Yeah.
And also, if you could confirm that the intention of the track was both access to the residential property and the estate.
Okay. The access road, yes, is inappropriate, and that is why we refused the original application and issued the enforcement notice. It is still inappropriate at its reduced width, so you have to consider whether it's acceptable now or not. The application only proposes to provide the access to the stable block. However, as indicated, there is the potential, although it wouldn't be lawful, to access the dwelling from it as well.
It does seem to be an inappropriate development to me.
For me is fairly pertinent here is that there's a residential development and there is the potential for this route to become the access to that development, and that development already has an access route to it. So if there was difficulties or problems with that access, you could argue that there will be special circumstances as to why an access track might be needed. But there is an extant access track, so there is therefore no circumstances I can see for providing that access track all the way through to the residential area other than to provide a second driveway. Given that the drawing currently shows an extension of that track to the curtilage where the residential property is, I would suggest that that section at least is inappropriate development and there are no special circumstances for at least that section of it, and therefore we may want to consider refusing.
on that. Nick, yes, go on.
Okay, I'm going to go against the trend again, but I'm going to go against officer's recommendation here. All right. My reason for refusal are the proposed development would lead to a built-up form that would fail to comply with the purposes of including land within the green belt by virtue of encroaching into the countryside, also resulting in a loss of openness. The stable block is therefore inappropriate development, and very special circumstances to outweigh the harm or need for the building have not been advanced, in my opinion. The proposal is therefore contrary to National Planning Policy Framework and Welwyn Hatfield District Plan 2005 Policy RA10. Secondly, the driveway, compared to the previously dismissed planning and enforcement appeals, would result in a reduced in width and different materials. However, it is considered that this would still result in a development that would be harmful to the rural character of the area, and as well as providing access to the stable block, appear to be providing access to the dwelling house. This was considered as part of both appeals which I've looked at and dismissed as an existing access already exists, which was Paul's point. It's therefore considered that the development would conflict with the National Policy Planning Framework and again Policy RA10 of the Welwyn Hatfield District Plan 2005. And they're my reasons.
Okay, thank you. The next one is item 10, which is 62 Hill Rise, Cuffley, Potters Bar. Alterations to the roof to include an increase in ridge height, formation of hip to gable, and increase in height of front gable to facilitate accommodation in the existing loft space, and the addition of 2 front and 2 rear dormers and a roof light.
Front of you at the moment, so it is quite a large 2-storey dwelling, and you can notice on that plan a little bit of the different relationship of the levels on the site. Looking at the next plan, the proposal would raise the roof by 1.9 metres, sorry, 0.9 metres. It would introduce dormers and the roof light into the frontage as well as to the rear of the building. The height has been reduced compared to the previous application. Materials are largely comparable to the existing property. The only change will be in relation to the roof tiles, which are currently brown interlocking tiles, and it's proposed to use grey antique clay roof tiles. What I'm going to do is just jump to the street view, because we've stolen a few photographs. So on the right hand side you can see a white gable end halfway down. That is the application property, so you can get a sense of the change in land levels. And next drawing, photo. This is looking at the property diagonally from the opposite side, so you've got the adjoining property immediately to the left. This one is standing in Woods View with your right hand side to the property looking across the street. So again, you can see very much the difference in roof heights as you come up the hill. That's just almost the same as the one before, where you can see the property in the background on the left hand side. And this one is from Woods Avenue looking to the rear of the property. Just to the right hand side you do have a bungalow that, as you can see from that elevation, it is set much lower down than the existing properties. However, officers have given pre-application advice, and whilst increase in roof heights in many areas can be quite finely balanced, it was considered that the reduction in height by only increasing it by 0.9 metres did make the application acceptable in this case. Officers don't consider there would be a loss of privacy to neighbouring occupiers because first floor side windows could be conditioned to be obscured. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The last two speakers tonight. Firstly, Mrs. Caroline Saunders, who's the applicant, please.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Chairman and members of the Planning Committee. My husband and I are here to support the application for a loft conversion at our family home at 62 Hill Rise, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. After our initial application was refused, we took advantage of the pre-application advice service, and the new proposal was created in consultation with the council planning team. We took the opportunity to adopt all of their recommendations, which vastly improved upon our plans, and therefore we believe that the objection raised by the parish council is not valid for the following reasons. I'm hoping you were all distributed with these that I submitted as a late submission 48 hours ago, hopefully. But if I can draw your attention to appendices 1 and 2, they show that houses similar to our proposal are seen elsewhere in Cuffley, and having worked with the council to ensure the design looks like a loft conversion rather than a third storey, our house will reflect the look of number 61, which is just opposite us, in that it features a front gable and 2 small dormers within the roof. Given that there are other properties on Hill Rise, such as 36 and 46 seen in these appendices, that have been given consent for tall pitched roofs to contain dormers, but they have smaller driveways and smaller rear gardens than our house, we also believe that our site would not be overdeveloped and would fit well within the street scene and Cuffley as a whole. Appendix 3, I've been busy, sorry. Appendix 3 shows that our proposed ridgeline would maintain its relationships with those of the surrounding properties. So 57 opposite, 60 to our left, and the houses at the start of Hanyards Lane, 33 and the others, would all retain higher ridgelines than our new proposed ridge. So it doesn't change anything in terms of how we sit with the surrounding houses. And finally, the question about insufficient on-site parking, I got some friends to pop over and park on the drive just to show you that there's 4 cars on the drive and there's plenty of space to put more in if we needed to. So, you know, that was just to try and illustrate that. All of our neighbours are in support of our plans. They know that we've got a growing family and we don't want to move. And Appendix 5, you will have hopefully seen, is a letter from the people who own that bungalow that's at the bottom, in support of our application, and yesterday, too late to submit, I received another one from 19 Woodview. So those are the 2 properties that are sort of seen by ours at the back.
The officers have not had copies of your late representation. No, I think what we need to do is defer this from tonight. I'm sorry, I've just seen this, but they haven't had the papers, so we need to defer it because I'm sorry for keeping you here so long, and for the parish council as well.
Got your photograph?
I've had it too.
Yeah.
Yep.
I wasn't given a copy because I checked them when we circulate them and they weren't passed to me, so I'm not quite sure. So I can only apologise. Our constitution does say we can't circulate papers on the evening, regretfully. Says we won't circulate papers on the evening. Then if they refuse it.
If they refuse it.
Or do we, if the committee's minded to grant, we allow them to grant. If they're minded to refuse,
Do we
then
defer?
we defer.
Yeah.
Is that not
Yeah.
possible? We've got a chance to deal with it tonight.
Yeah.
Okay, we will proceed. But if the committee is minded to approve the application, we will let that go on that. If the committee is minded to refuse the application for any reason, then we will defer it, because we will have been refusing your application without the officers seeing all of the information available. Okay? Right, so you've said as much as you want to.
It was just that I would hope that you received it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for having me along this evening. So, if I could just refer back to the previous application which was refused, the grounds for refusal was due to its size, bulk, its massing and its design. The extension was not considered subordinate in scale to the original, and it doesn't respect and relate to the size and siting of surrounding properties. So the Parish Council feels that the amended plans do not sufficiently address these concerns. So the previous, in terms of the height of the previous application, this was 1.6 metres and this has been reduced to 0.9 metres, which if you think about it is just slightly over 2 foot. And in a property of that size, it's really not a huge reduction. So we feel it's probably still reasonable to refuse it on those grounds. The application refers to it as a loft conversion, but we feel it's really a 3-storey house, and that is inappropriate to the street scene. It's not really changed much. It's incongruous to the street scene and out of character with the surrounding houses. The situation is very important, as you could see from the photographs. It's not called Hill Rise for nothing. It's a very steeply sloping hill, and this property is right on the top of it. So it's very dominant, and so we think it would dominate the surrounding houses. The adjoining property is to the northwest of the house, so it will be permanently in shade from that property, and raising the roof height further would exacerbate that. We do feel that there is inadequate parking for a change from a 4-bedroom to a 6-bedroom property, although we appreciate that in the report this satisfies the Council's requirement. And then finally, could I just add, the house before these applications were put in had already been extended considerably, with 2-storey side and rear extensions and single-storey front and rear extensions before this was put in. So, in conclusion, the Parish Council feels that the amendments are insufficient to overcome the concerns of the previous application, which was refused. Thank you.
Cuffley is one of those villages where you really need to visit to see the properties, because it is so hilly that the scale of one property against the next one becomes more apparent or more dominant because of the hills. And it is unfortunate that this one, it's about at the top of Hill Rise, it's slightly down one side, but as you come up from one way, you see the property high up on the hill. Going round the on the other way, you come over the hill, and then it's on your right-hand side, you go down the hill. But the hilliness of Cuffley does make a difference to the bulk, I think, of massing of the buildings. Irene?
Yes, the fact that they're saying that it's not a loft extension, it is a loft extension. It's quite obvious, and the fact that they've actually come to the council, had pre-application, they've ticked every box. I really can't say that we could really refuse this. Otherwise, why ask people to come in for pre-application, get advice, tick every box, and then have it turned down? That's not fair. So I will be going with officer's recommendation.
I had a good look around the area, and the properties there are all shapes and sizes. I don't see that this application is in any way overbearing. In fact, the footprint, if you look on the map, the footprint on this property is actually smaller than a large number of those. I would have no issues. I don't think there's an issue with parking, and it is very obviously a loft conversion. And I totally agree with Irene that they've gone down the right route. They've had the advice. They've gone with it. I don't think that there's any problem with it.
Obviously I agree with all of that. I just wanted to say one thing in terms of the objection I was thinking about, because it was rejected before. One of the objections here now is that taking it down to 0.9 in height is an insignificant reduction, but by the same token then it must be an insignificant increase, in which case we should go ahead. That's my logic there, right? So that was it. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I have no problem with this application. Just I slightly concerned with regards to Councillor Dean's comment. I mean, I don't think so. If applicant has paid for pre-application fees, and if the officers have said, yeah, we agree, that doesn't mean that they have all the right that applicants should be approved, because we have refused so many applications. We have gone against the officers' recommendations. So I think I am slightly disagree with Councillor Dean's statement on that things which is unfair, or I don't think so that should be relevant here. Thank you.
Understand that with young people, which they are, very young, probably going to have a large family, and we've got to understand that young people cannot afford to move and buy a bigger house. It's not possible in these times, not for another 50 years. So how can we possibly refuse it?
They won't be young then.
No.
do.
Yeah.
Councillors, many months ago, asked for information on cost decisions when they came through. So this is the first one that we've reported. So it's good news that it's the first one. And obviously on page 74 you'll see the sum that was awarded.
Committee, so you'll be getting your bill shortly. Right. Okay, item 12, planning update and the future planning applications. A number of these have been on here a long time. The ones on travellers and gypsies will probably be on here for a little while until the plan moves further forward. Anybody wish to say anything else on future ones?
I've been through all these and there's an awful lot coming up that are going to be HMOs. Now, about 2 years ago, we decided that we were getting so many that we were saying we had to know before we could give permission how many HMOs were in that radius. All of a sudden, we don't get to hear that information. So we're just pushing them through, and I don't know how Hatfield's going to cope.
When it comes to the application, we do get to see how many are in the area. I mean, normally we
do.
When it comes to the committee, about how many in the 50 metres? Yeah.
Oh, I think it's got to be made quite clear because Hatfield is, I don't know how they're going to cope in another few years, really.
But of course the only thing we get told is the number of licensed HMOs.
That's
not
right.
the number of
Yeah.
unlicensed.
There's so
And
many
that's-
that are not licensed.
Anecdotally, we know there are far more.
What we did say is the arrangement, we would look at the number of HMOs within the radius. We would check that with the housing team, both those that are licensed and those where there is a suspicion that it's an HMO, and go and investigate that, and that would form part of this decision-making process. So that will form part of the decision-making process.
Ask you to check with the waste management services as well, client services, because obviously where those properties have asked for larger bins, that's usually indicative of a HMO.
Item 13 then is the Development Management Performance Report, July to September.
Partly because you will notice, hopefully, that there are quite a few changes compared to the previous quarter. As we always say at committee for properties within Welwyn Garden City, that you can't consider the estate management scheme. Because the planning team deal with estate management, we thought it was useful to present the number of applications that are estate management relative to all the others. So the graph on page 93 at the bottom, I think the ones I'd like to draw your attention to most is the estate management in the nice shade of blue, in my opinion, compared to the householder, which is in yellow. Householder applications cover the whole of the borough, whereas estate management is just Welwyn Garden City. And the numbers are pretty close, which I think indicates the number of cases that are estate management. Performance, I think last quarter we reported that there had been a 16% increase in workload. There hasn't been a further increase in workload of 16%, but that increase has been maintained this quarter. And the officers, as ever, are incredibly busy. However, our performance has stayed fairly consistent, as you'll see from page 95. Minors are always our challenge, mainly because that encompasses new dwelling houses up to 9 units, and they're always the most challenging in terms of negotiation, trying to get it right, and most often they don't apply for pre-app. We were asked to present how many cases officers had on hand, and that's given in paragraph 4.4. And as you'll see at the bottom of that, it says 79 cases on hand. The RTPI, I think you'll be aware, we reported indicated about approximately 120 cases per case officer per annum. So the officers are significantly in advance of that. But Colin was forwarded some information about a week ago, which indicated that case officers' workload should be about 20 cases. I'd like to work at that authority. But just also because we've spoken about extensions of times in the past, on the graph at the bottom you've got number of cases determined each quarter together with the number of time extensions. And obviously when a time extension is sought, that is in effect increasing the workload because the decision's not going out. But it does mean that we meet our performance. The next three graphs just give you indication for majors, minors and others of the number of decisions that are granted, refused and withdrawn, etc., which I thought might be quite interesting. April, you'll note majors, all of which were granted. And also realise the landscaping team do an awful lot of work, most of which doesn't get reported because it's dealing with planning applications. So now you've got in your report, and it will be presented in future, the number of cases they're dealing with, again the decisions, the numbers that are within time, and as well the number of consultations that we as a planning department send across to them. So I think you'll see their workload is quite high as well. Especially because the one landscape officer left in September, so the other case officer is having to pick up their work as well, although we will get a new starter in January, which is great news. Total appeal decisions on page 100 is as normal, as are the enforcement notices. Enforcement, Bright will obviously update you very shortly. They continue to be incredibly busy, over 100 cases each that they're working on. So when it appears that not much is happening, it is because they're trying to spread their resources to deal with the most pressing cases and as well the ones that are creating the most harm, but they will look at all of them. And lastly, as ever, more changes in development management across support and DM. And I think I reported last month that Mark is now the principal following the departure of Andy Mangum. Thank you, Chair. Very short, we've received 12 responses which are reported at the back. Pretty much all of those that have a planning reference that relates to the validation checklist we have updated. The updates are in red, and if committee are happy then we will go live with our new checklist imminently.
Comments on that, anybody? Right, okay. Now, then we have some part 2, so I must ask you to resolve that under section 100A(2) and 4 of the Local Government Act, the press and public be now excluded from the meeting for item 17 on the ground that it involves the likely disclosure of confidential or exempt information as defined in section 100A(3) and paragraphs 2, information likely to reveal the identity of an individual, and 6, statutory notice of order of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the said Act as amended. Do we agree that? Agree. Thank you. And if I could ask the officers to turn off the recording or the streaming. Thank you. James, you'll have to go. Oh no, no, he doesn't, has he? No. Right. Okay, you're not a member of the public in this instance. Okay. Right, so the next item then is the enforcement item.
Thank you, Chair. Members will note that the list is getting slightly lighter. We're getting a lot more of our cases resolved. But I would like to point out that for Warriewood Manor, we still have some outstanding issues there, but then they're not covered under this particular enforcement notice that we served. So I've recommended this particular case to be closed, and we've got a new case set up to deal with the new issues